Okay, we're done with the first installment of this repair. We're breaking it into multiple parts because it's just a big long repair. So we've got the transfer case out of the truck. It all depends what you're going after for this repair. Maybe you're pulling the transfer case out because the transfer case needs work. Maybe you're doing what we're doing, that you want to separate the transfer case first from the transmission and then pull the transmission out. There's other ways you can do this. We could pull the whole unit out as one, so we can disconnect the transmission from the engine and pull the transmission and transfer case out as one unit. But we just decided that it was going to be easier to separate the transfer case from the transmission first, so it's a little bit less bulk and weight to deal with in dropping that transmission transfer case combined unit out. So we separate the transfer case first. And it all depends why you're doing this. You might be wanting to do this because your flex plate broke. Maybe you're doing this because your rear main seal on your engine is leaking. So if that's the case, you might not be dropping this thing out at all. You wouldn't want to separate the transfer case from the transmission, because all you really want to do then to do the rear main seal or maybe the flex plate is you just want to disconnect it from the engine and disconnect the flex plate from the torque converter, so you can pull the whole assembly back to where now you can get access to the flex plate or you can get access to the rear main seal. If you don't have enough room, maybe you just want to drop the whole assembly out. But what I'm trying to say is that it depends what you're doing. So for us, we felt it was easier to just remove the transfer case from the transmission, and then we're going to work on getting the transmission out today. So let's show you what the transfer case looks like now in better light. Okay, so this is the transfer case. This is where the shift lever goes. We just got this little piece of towel in here because this looks like whatever this bushing is kind of deteriorating, falling apart. Now, when we were pulling this out, this slides into the main transmission, and when we were sliding this out, the transfer case kind of rolled a little bit on us, even though we thought we had it on the ratchet strap to the transmission jack pretty good. It moved on us, and then I think it caught the output shaft seal on the transmission and tore it just a little bit. So if you are pulling this out and you're not planning on doing anything with your transmission, just be careful as you're pulling this out. You try to pull it out as straight as possible. Don't let it drop and damage the seal. You can see all the different electrical connections that we had to undo. What all these do, I don't know, but you have to disconnect them. You got one here. You've got these, they look like probably like solenoid or something, but all these different connections. And then here's where your drive shaft's attached to. It sits like this on your rig. So that's kind of level where the shift is up. So that's how it sits. So right here, see this little metal post? There's a vacuum line that attaches the transfer case to the transmission right here. That was the only thing that we missed to disconnect when we were ready to pull this out. As we started to drop the transfer case out, I saw a vacuum line being stretched. So we jacked it back up and then pulled this off. And we'll go inside Sean's rig and we'll show you where that vacuum line is, so you'll know to disconnect that so you don't have the same problem we had and you're gonna start stretching that thing out, maybe tear it. So let's go into the rig and we'll show you. This is the vacuum line that I was just referencing on the top of the transfer case. It connects right here. When you get your shift console out of the way, you could actually disconnect it from here. It'd probably be easier than trying to do it from below underneath the truck. So just pull it off here, so when you drop the transfer case, you're not going to stretch this thing out and break it. So this is the output shaft seal that I was talking about. See that little tear right there? So I'm pretty sure we did that as we were pulling it out. The shaft rubbed against this and dropped, and since this is an old seal, it's the original seal on the transmission, it's probably a little bit brittle and it tore. So this wouldn't be a hard thing to replace, but you know, if you're careful, maybe you won't have to replace it. But then again, while you're in there, this might be actually smart to replace, so maybe replace this anyway since you're in there, because why not? It's probably like a $5 sealer. We got the transfer case out. Now we're going to work on getting the transmission out. So we're going to walk you through all the steps we're going to do to disconnect the transmission from the engine and get that sucker pulled out. All right, just like any job that you do, there's always little hang-ups. What we noticed on this job, the hang-ups were all the little electrical connections that you got to disconnect from the transfer case. You've got the black wire loom that comes from the front of the transmission all the way back, and it's connected at all these different parts, and then you got the electrical connections. So You just got to take your time and make sure you get all those electrical connections disconnected from the transfer case and that main black wire loom disconnected at all the points that attaches to the transfer case. The other hang up we saw was the number 4 cross member. That's the one furthest back on the truck. And we noticed when we took a couple of the bolts out on either side, the thing actually shifted and it kind of locked the last 2 bolts on either side into the frame. So we had to take a pry bar and get a purchase point and pry to where we can actually free those bolts. So there must be a little bit of torque on the frame of the truck, and as soon as you start relieving pressure on a couple of the bolts, it wants to pull out on you. So you have to use a little bit of manual force there with the pry bar to be able to get those other bolts out. So that was a little bit of a hang up. Those seem like the main things, and just some of the tricks we showed you, how you could set the brake and be able to get 2 hands on a wrench to break the bolts that hold the propeller shaft on. That was kind of helpful too. So it's not a hard job. You just got to make sure you take your time and make sure all the electrical connections are undone before you start to drop it out, because the last thing you want to do is have to stop what you're doing because you realize, oh shoot, I forgot to disconnect that, and you're starting to stretch an electrical connection and possibly break it. So take your time, make sure that wire loom is completely free, the vacuum hose is disconnected, blah blah blah. Just get it all free and you'll be good to go. We're gonna disconnect the sway bar, get it out of the way. We're going to remove the brackets now for the sway bar. We got the end links disconnected on either side, and now this is a 12 millimeter nut and bolt on each sway bar bushing to remove it. So you got a bolt and a nut on each side. I just got to get the other side done. So now we're working on getting all the electrical connections off the main transmission disconnected. And a lot of them that are holding this black wire loom are like this, so you have to get in and pull this up and away. It's got a little clip on the back that hooks up to a metal thing on the transmission, so you lift that up and then you could pull it free. So we just got this one over here free. This one right here is the same exact thing. You got to pull up on that little plastic tab and then slide it up towards the body to get it loose. And now we're just going to work our way and see all the different connections. We got one here. Then I'm gonna have to use probably pliers to get that one disconnected too. So we're just working on everything to get all the electrical connections free so we can pull this transmission out. There's another plastic clip up over here, and it's kind of hard to get a screwdriver to pull the little plastic tab, but there's a 10 millimeter bolt that's attaching it to the transmission. I just disconnected this bracket and then I just screwed the bolt back into the side of the transmission. This is on the driver's side right now. Just like the other side, Sean is choosing to disconnect the bracket rather than trying to get the clip out, you know, because it's just hard to get to. So whatever way you want to do it, disconnect the bracket, disconnect the clip, whichever way you find easiest to get all these electrical connections undone. Like before, we're putting it back where the bolt was. So just one less thing we got to keep track of. So Sean just disconnected the air fuel mixture sensor, which is the one in front of the front catalytic converter. So he just disconnected that one right there. We're on the passenger side. This is the button you push to get the electrical connection out. So just push your thumb on this, use your other hand to push away. Now that's disconnected. We're wondering how to get this one disconnected. It runs to some type of sensor right here. So we're thinking, how do we do that? But we follow this up this way, and there's a clip on the top of the transmission that looks like it might be hard to get to, but I don't know if you can see it from here. It's this one right here. That's the one we have disconnected, and then the harness will be completely free of the transmission. So we got to undo this one. So now you can see that was the last connector over yonder, this one right here, that leads to the sensor. That was the last one we had to do. So now you can see this whole thing is all these electrical connection. This harness is free. It goes up over to here towards the front of the engine. And so, you know, here's your bell housing right here. So nothing is left on this wire housing that's going to hold the transmission from being removed. We're going to go on to the next step. Going to remove the filler pipes. There's the send and return lines from the transmission, and we're going to disconnect it And always use a flare nut wrench when you're working on these type of lines. You get a much better connection to the head of the nut, and you're less likely to strip it. So lefty loosey, righty tighty. Okay, that one broke free. We didn't mention it, but we already drained the transmission. We already drained the pan, and but these oil cooler lines will still be holding some fluid, so just know that you're going to get some dripping out when you disconnect these. So that's disconnected, and as we pull the transmission out, it'll clear free. We're going to remove this one too, disconnect it. Now we're figuring out why the factory service manual suggests removing this front exhaust, is because it'd probably be easier to get this flare nut connection for one of the lines from the transmission disconnect. There's just not enough room to turn the flare nut wrench in there. So instead of trying to fight this that we know is pretty much rusted in place, we're gonna just take the pan off. We've already taken it off to see what the metal shavings are. So we're just gonna zip all these bolts out, and then this lower part of the transmission tube will be out of the way. Then we'll be able to disconnect that, and then we'll just put the pan back on, because we're gonna be supporting the transmission on that transmission jack on the pan. So we got all the 10mm bolts out that hold the pan on. Now we're just gonna drop this out. Since we have the pan off, we decided we'd show you all the sludge that was in there in bits. So some of these bits are big. Like, they're like 2mm, 3mm bits. That's not normal. I mean, you might see like tiny little metal shavings that collect on these magnets. So here's a magnet right here. It's got all this goop on it, all the different particles on it, but you got these magnets on the bottom of the pan that collect metal particles, and they're just all covered in bits like that, big bits. So here's your pan. There's a magnet here, magnet there, magnet there, and they all collect the metal. This is not normal. Something blew up in there. The lower part of the dipstick tube that's attached to the pan is out of the way. Now I can get on here with the flare nut wrench and loosen it. So I already broke it free. Remember, the lower part of the dipstick tube was right in the way, so now that I got that out of the way, I can get this flare nut loose, this line. So it's loose now. I could turn it with my hand, most likely. Oh, it's a little stuck feeling. It's turning. So right here, this is where the send and return lines attach with a bracket to the bell housing. So it's a 10mm nut. So in order to free the transmission completely from the lines, we have to back out this 10mm nut, release this bracket from the bell housing. So that's what we're going to do now. Good thing to do before you start removing the starter, because we're going to be messing with electrical connections that go right to the starter. We're going to disconnect one of the battery cables. This is the positive. So the next step we're doing is we're disconnecting the power to the starter. It's a 12mm nut right here. I'm just using a shorty 1/4 inch ratchet, and you can get in here a little smaller. So you loosen it up, and then you take off the nut, and you could take the electrical connection off of it. And you can just pull this off, so that's free. We're disconnecting the starter because it's connected to the bell housing. It has to come off to get the transmission up. This electrical connection right here is a little hard to get to. I used a long screwdriver to push on the button here while my left hand came in and pulled it out. So it's just a little hard to get your hand in there, but you can do it, because once you release the bolts that hold the starter to the bell housing, I don't want to be tugging on this line, so I want to disconnect it first if you can. So now it's disconnected. So now we got the main electrical connection and the other connection done. Look at the setup. Coming from one of the starter bolts all the way back, it goes 14mm socket. You got a swivel, got transmission fluid dripping in my long impact extension, another long one, another shorter one, way back to where I can get the gun on it, and it works. One thing that I forgot to do first before you take that last bolt out that holds the starter to the bell housing, there's a brake bracket here and then another brake bracket on the other side, on the inside of the passenger side frame. So disconnect both of those so now you could pull this brake line out of your way because the starter is going to come right out this direction. Then I'm going to go on the underside here, and there's one basically right on the other side. So now with both brake brackets free, you can pull this line out of the way enough to where you can get the starter to come out this way. If we didn't explain it before, this little mud guard just slips off of these little plastic things. So you just unhook it from both of those and you just tuck it out of your way wherever you can. And now we're going after the bottom starter bolt. Same setup with all the long extensions, the swivel. Now see the starter move? He's gonna hold the starter while I back it out the rest of the way. So you gotta twist this thing around. Would it be easier with the tire out of the way? Yes, it would. So just note this orientation. I actually forgot when I did the starter. Your solenoid's here, the main electrical connection from the battery is there, your breather and that other electrical connections on the top. So if you bring it out this way, just crank on the line to the left, to the back of the vehicle, and you can get it past the upper control arm bolt, and you can get it out just like that. So now your starter's out. Before you start yanking on the line, there's a clip on the passenger side fender. You have to clear the brake line of the passenger side clip so then you can get more movement. I blew it and tugged on it and I actually broke it, so don't do that. Free it of this clip on the fender first and then you can move the brake line where you want it. We're at the point now where we're gonna be taking off the access plate to get at the bolts that hold the flex plate onto the torque converter. And so this access plate is right here. I'm looking basically right in between the cross member here, the differential's right there. This is the steering rack. And I'm looking straight up at the oil pan and you see there's one 12mm nut here, there's another one right there, there's another one where it's kind of hard to see but I'll point it, my fingers, this is looking from the backside right here, and then there's another one right here. So there's four 12mm bolts that hold that access plate, and I'm using a short 12mm gear wrench, a ratcheting wrench, to get on them. So it's going to be hard for me to film this, but get in there with a wrench and back them out and then this plate will come off. So I'll show you when I get the plate off. So what do I have here? I have 18-inch breaker bar and I got a 19mm impact socket on the crank bolt. I'm going to have Sean turning the engine while I'm telling him when to stop to where I can access those bolts on the flex plate that hold the flex plate to the torque converter. And so you want to turn this clockwise. So this is the front of the engine right here. So he's going to be turning it this way. Just like the direction of the clock. Just like that. That direction. And then he's going to stop when I tell him to so I can get the best access. I'm going to go back further underneath the truck and show you. You're looking right here. This is the flex plate. And so as he turns it, I'm going to try to get the bolt right about there. Somewhere around there where I can either get a ratchet on it or a gear wrench, ratcheting wrenches. It's 14mm and I'm going to see the best position and then have him stop, and then I'm going to try to break it free, and then he's going to turn the engine for me till another bolt shows in that sweet spot, and then we're going to stop there and I'm going to get that one free. So that's our plan. So you can see this is one of the bolts that holds it to the torque converter, and so Sean's going to turn it, the crankshaft bolt, to where I can kind of get it right around in this position, and then I can get a gear wrench. Ratcheting wrench is a pretty good one, so I can slide this in, get it on the nut, and then, you know, lefty loosey, righty tighty. Sean actually has to hold the crank bolt firm while I break it loose, because if he doesn't, the flex plate wants to spin away towards the driver's side. It wants to spin the way I'm trying to loosen it. So if he holds it firm, I can break it free, and then we're going to rotate to where you see the next bolt, and we're going to do the same thing. He holds it, I break it free, we pull it out and go to the next one. Okay, Sean, go ahead and turn the crankshaft bolt. So Sean's turning it to where I can see the next one. Okay, I see the next one. Stop right there. That's good. So now I can get access to the next one. You could also get in here with a 3/8 ratchet with a 14mm socket, and there's enough room. You can see there's enough room. I'm gonna have Sean spin it just one more time to see if any other ones. I think that manual said only 6, So if we see an open hole, we know we've got them all. Yep, that's it. We got them all. So there's 6 14mm bolts holding the flex plate to the torque converter. Now we're working on removing all the bell housing bolts that attach it to the engine. And I have this long setup of extensions. I tried to break her free with my DeWalt and it did not do it. I had to get the breaker bar out. So now I got the breaker bar connected and I was able to bust it free. So do it however you want to do it, but I think stringing a bunch of extensions back far enough to where you can turn a ratchet or a big breaker bar is the way to go. You don't have enough room to turn anything unless you have a really powerful impact gun you can get in there. So mine let me down, which is a bummer. Anyways, now I got it broken loose. Now I can zip it out the rest of the way with the impact gun. So there's number 1. Now we're gonna keep track and see if all these are the same size. If they're not, we're gonna have to know where they're coming out. So this one is on the passenger side, right near the transmission cooler line. It's the bottommost one on the passenger side. Now we're gonna go for the next one, yonder, up here. This is still on the passenger side, so it's the next one up towards the underside of the body. We're gonna go for this one right now. So now we are on the driver's side. This is the lowest one on the driver's side. And again, we're just giving up on the impact gun to break these free. We're breaking it free with a big breaker bar and then we're backing them out. So this is number 3. We noticed that the first 2 bolts were the exact same length. So we're wondering if these are all going to be the same. Hopefully they are. Then there's less guesswork getting them back in. Yep, they're all the same size. So that's nice. So we're breaking free the next one. You can see we have about a 2-foot breaker bar with a bunch of long impact extensions with a swivel to a 17mm. And we're gonna break this one free. Once you have it broken free, then you can get your 1/2-inch ratchet. And then now that's hand tight now. Just back it out. The swivel was binding up.
Check this length. Be the same?
Yep, they're all the same. So the last 4, we already spotted the last 4 on the top of the transmission, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go up along the top with a bunch of extensions, get on them, and then break them free with the breaker bar. So you can see the setup. I got a bunch of extensions strung together, and I got the swivel with the 17mm socket. Get it on there. Got a bunch of long extensions together. Now I'm going to just break it free with the breaker bar. So up to this point, people, we don't have the transmission supported other than on the back part of it. So before we take out this last bolt on the upper part, we're going to get the transmission jack underneath. The reason why we didn't have it underneath there at the start is because it would get in our way to get at all the bolts. So now that we have most of them out, we're going to get the transmission jack in place and then get the last one out. So we're just jacking this thing up into place. It seems kind of counterintuitive to actually support it on the pan, but where else are you going to support it? There's really nowhere else you can put it. So if you see how the way this transmission jack goes together, it's got these bolts with these things that slide in and out. You can adjust to what you're lifting up. But I'm a little worried that these bolt heads are going to put concentrated pressure on the pan. So we've got this foam pads that we use for kneeling on. I'm going to just get these in position, a double layer of them. This way it'll be less pressure with those bolt heads, hopefully, and it won't do any damage to the pan. So we did have a regular 6-ton jack holding it here. Now that we got the weight of the transmission on the transmission jack, I was able to pull it out. So now we're ready to take the last bolt out and then pull this transmission back. So I'm just wiggling this. We got the last bolt out, and I'm just wiggling this thing and trying to pull back at the same time. And okay, it dropped a little bit, so I don't know if we have to pick it up a little more. Yeah, pick it up a little bit. Okay, that's good right there. It's clear of the lines. It was just hung up on the flex plate. It seems the key to getting the flex plate to clear the bell housing is to look from this orientation, like when you were taking the access plate off, because we were fighting the jack a little bit and going up and down, and then when I finally looked from the back and kind of saw how I needed to manipulate the jack, whether up or down to where the flex plate wasn't rubbing up against the bell housing, we were finally able to clear it all the way. So now we can start dropping this thing downward. We just have it balancing right now. Should we have ratchet strapped it? Probably. It's like a slow motion movie. And your flex plate is intact. Okay, I'll speed up this slow motion movie. Now, getting it out of here, it's too tall. Fuck. Since the transmission jack adds a little height and we don't have this up on the lift, we're jacking up the driver's side frame so the bell housing can clear while it's still on the jack, because we don't want to just take the transmission off the jack and drag it across the ground, so we want to keep it on the jack. So I think we're almost there. Stop right there, Sean, and I'm going to maneuver the whole shebang this way and then try to pull it out right here. I got a jack stand on it just in case it falls. It's not going to crush the transmission, say. So go ahead, keep on going up, Sean. So we're trying to get it high enough to where we can clear the bell housing underneath driver's side frame member. Keep going up. Bring this out. I'm just going to tilt the bell housing a little bit. It's free. You're free. It's free. This is what you call a transmission. This is it. Some Japanese writing. I don't know what it means. So this is a transmission. And this is the torque converter. So this is where the flex plate that is attached to the motor hooks up with these 6 connections. Here's our little vacuum line that was hooked up to the transfer case. This is your breather, shifter lever, all the different electrical connections over here too. So this is it. So here's our thought process with how Sean's transmission failed. He had an actual structural failure where something broke free in the transmission and ground up. We confirmed by dropping the pan that there was like 2 to 3 millimeter chunks. When you're doing this type of job, that transmission fluid runs a path from the transmission, from a send line, goes to the transmission cooler in the bottom of the radiator, gets cooled, and then returns back to the transmission. So what we want to avoid is any of those little metal bits that maybe could be somewhere trapped in the metal return and send lines, also the rubber lines that lead from the metal lines to the transmission cooler in the bottom of the radiator. And then also that transmission cooler in the bottom of the radiator could have little bits of metal in it. Do we know 100% there's anything in there? We don't know. There's no way to know if there's any trapped bits in the cooler in the bottom of the radiator, because we have to tear it apart and we're not going to bother doing that. So what are we going to do? We're going to pull the metal lines and the rubber lines free of the engine. We're going to pour fluid through them, maybe blow some air through them and see, and just do our best to make sure that no metal is trapped in those lines. That's number one. Number two is that about this time with your 3rd gen 4Runner, he's got 160,000 miles on it. And he planned on replacing his radiator anyways. And at the same time, we were going to add an external transmission cooler so he can keep his transmission temperatures down a little bit better. As part of this whole repair, we're going to take those metal lines off. We're going to pour fluid through them and blow them out with an air compressor, see if we can get any trapped metal out of there. And then we're going to replace the radiator, and we're going to add a transmission cooler. And we're not going to show this part of it because you could actually see the video that I did of installing a new radiator and transmission cooler on my truck. So we'll put a reference to it, but we're not going to show it in this actual footage of replacing this transmission. So we'll go underneath the rig and we'll explain more about how we're going to take those lines off. So here's your 2 metal lines. We're on the passenger side of the vehicle. This is the return line that returns the cooled transmission fluid that runs through the radiator cooler. This is the send line that sends the hot transmission fluid from the transmission to the radiator cooler to be cooled off and then returned on this line right here. So those are your 2 metal lines. The longer one is the return line. The shorter one, or more forward line, is the send line, okay? So we're gonna remove these lines. So there's already one bracket that we removed to get the transmission free. So that one's not a problem. There's another one just a little bit further back right here. And it looks like they're 12 millimeter bolts, but I'll confirm them when I start to take them off. So there's one more additional clamp here that we can free it from the motor. And then if you go forward a little more, there's another one right here. And they look like they're both the same size bolt, like either a 10 or a 12. So those are the 2 connections that we can free the metal lines from the motor. Now if we go more forward, that send line right here goes into the transmission cooler right here. So it transitions to a rubber line right where I'm pointing. See where that metal clamp is? That hose connects to the metal line right there. So that's where the metal line ends. It goes into the transmission cooler. It travels through the cooler, which is in the bottom of the radiator here. And then this is the return line that goes back again to the metal line. You can see where the hose clamp is. And then that returns to that line that's longer or more further back on the transmission. So we're going to disconnect these lines also so we can pull those metal lines off the engine, because this is going to hang us up. This line right here we're not going to reuse because we're going to be running different lines to an external cooler and then back to the transmission, but we'll be reusing this one. So we're going to keep this one attached for right now. This one will disconnect fully because we're not going to need this one anymore. So that's our next step, is we're going to take the metal line brackets off so we can remove it. So we disconnected these two rubber lines first. Bolts that hold the transmission cooler lines to the engine are 10 millimeter. You can't really see it, but I just broke it free with a 3/8 ratchet and a 10 millimeter. Now I got my Milwaukee. If you don't know one of these, I highly suggest getting one because it just makes it a lot easier to spin things out. You break them free maybe first with a regular ratchet, but then get one of these on there and it just makes it so much easier to spin things out. Unless you really like the wrist exercise, these are nice to have. So that one's out, little 10 millimeter bolt, and now we're gonna get the other one. So now this thing's free. It's got like clamping action. You see how that undoes? So you could just, I don't know if that pulls off all the way, but it's got little rubby dubbies here that capture it. So when you put it back together, just make sure that the rubber goes back around there. Pieces protect the metal lines from the metal clamp, so we'll have to make sure to get those back on. So I'm on the next one. You can see with the ratchet, just breaking it free a little bit. Now I'm going to transition to the Milwaukee to spin it off. Okay, so now that all the brackets are free, I can pull these lines out, and just be aware that there's still fluid in here. I'm dragging them forward here. You can drag them from the back like I'm doing, or drag them the other way, but there's still fluid in here. So now here's the lines. So I'm going to carefully take these out and not spill it all over the place like I've already spilled. And then we're going to see about pouring fluid through them and blowing air through them and see if we can get them clear of any possible metal bits. Alright, so they're free. Now, like I said, there's still a little bit of fluid. I already poured a little bit of it out, but you're still going to have fluid flowing through there. First thing is we're going to pour fluid through here and just let gravity do the work for us. We're going to pour fluid and just carry any metal bits that are in there out through the bottom. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to charge up my air compressor and just put the fitting in there and blow out, and then that'll be our last try to get any trapped things out of there. That's about, I think, the best we can do. Pour some fluid through there, see if that will pull it out, and then blow some air pressure through there. Just don't lose these things that protect your lines from the metal clamp. So when you're pulling these off, don't lose these little rubber grommets that protect the pipes. So here's a good reason maybe to keep these rubber lines attached for the time being. The metal side is going to be hard to fit a funnel in there. It doesn't really fit. You maybe have a real skinny one. So if you flip it over, rubber expands, right? You can manipulate it. So I'm just kind of forcing this thing in there. And then now I'm going to pour automatic transmission fluid. So we have a cleaner container. We're kind of curious to see if any bits are going to come out of this. Who knows? Here we go. Here goes nothing. Little chunk of something came out of there. Huh. Let's see if that's a metal bit after we're done here. Pour some more through. Is that it? What is that right there? This is
Piece of mud.
Piece of mud? That's not metal. Maybe there isn't anything trapped in here. Maybe we're just being paranoid. We're going to pour a little more through though. So after pouring fluid through both lines, it looks like there might have been just some microscopic little bits that you would like see attached to the magnets on the bottom of your pan, but no sizable chunks. So whether this is necessary or not, I don't know, but it doesn't hurt, so why not do it? As promised, little air compressor. It's a little air compressor that could. Not very powerful, but it does what I need it to do. I'm not running any air tools off this thing, so just a little air job or blow job. Anyways, so I'm just gonna go from the metal side. You can go from the rubber side too, whatever. We got a full tank again. We're just going to do it one more time. And we're going to do the second one, same thing. Couple rounds of a full tank of air.